If you watch my channel, you'll know why this is so filthy. Short story is a rear main seal that was going out, but this is the Fidanza flywheel for my 1999, my wife's 1999 Solara. You can see how filthy it is in the back, so I'm going to clean that up. And even though this friction material feels really good, and in fact it doesn't even look that bad. I mean, you can see what looks like wear here, but it really isn't bad at all. It's super flat. I really, no grooves or anything. The clutch plate actually was pretty good as well, except it got broken, so need to be replaced while I'm there. And since I bought a brand new one, I'm going to go ahead and install it, and I'm going to show you how I do it. But I am not, you know, a Fidanza salesman, and I've never done this before, and all I'm really doing is following the instructions that came in the package with the new one. It's like there's a little bit of wear on the teeth here from the starter. Anyway, so, but if you're going to do this, you'll know ahead of time kind of what to expect. These are supposed to be tightened to 5 foot-pounds, and I don't have a torque wrench that has a screwdriver bit. So I contacted a mechanical engineering buddy of mine, and he told me that if you put a Phillips head into your regular torque wrench and you go to 5 foot-pounds, it should give you essentially the same thing as if you had a screwdriver type one. He also said, though, that it would be okay, and this is what I intend to do, to torque it from the backside using the provided hardware over there. Those are self-locking nuts, so once you put them on, they shouldn't come back off. And indeed, this looks fine. They all look good. Nothing's loose. But first, I'm going to clean it all up, take off the old one, and inspect it, and then I'll get on to the process. So I cleaned it up. It's not totally clean yet because I want to pull off the friction material before I get down around these bolts a little bit better. If you're going to clean this and not replace the friction surface, I'd be really careful how you did it, because I think that the cleaner and stuff will get behind, you know, between this friction material and the aluminum, and it will want to come out here for a very long time. Well, it is spinning, so it might get slung out and come out over a short time, but either way, you don't think you want that stuff coming out and then maybe getting on the clutch or something like that. So I would be careful if you're not doing this how you clean that up. Maybe just do a wipe and not like a big spray like I've been doing. Right, now I'm just going to pull this off, and just like torquing on, I think you can even see some's coming out, right? I think I'm going to take it off from the back side, just like I'm going to put it on. So this is the back side after having removed it. After I got the last bolt out, it pretty much just fell out. It wasn't stuck or anything like that. But you can see how much stuff got behind it from cleaning. You can also see that there's even sort of a little bit of rust starting on this ring. Yep. And I wonder if all these marks, I guess, is kind of where the pressure is applied from the clutch engagement. So you can see it's not 100% even, but, you know, nothing really ever is, I don't think. But you can see stuff did get in behind there, and so I'm going to go ahead and get this all cleaned up. I put the flywheel in this sort of pristine cardboard box, and I want to see like sort of how much leaks out tomorrow when I come back. Okay, as you can see, this is pretty torn up, so I got a new one, and I'm not sure how to get it off. I'm hoping that this is pliable enough to just go over that, and I don't have to remove the whole shaft, because I've never done that before, and I'm not sure what's involved. I had to take off the arm that moves. This is a shifter, basically, right? It shifts it. You go that way, it shifts one way, and you go in or out, it goes another. And this is a shifter arm sort of that does it. This fits in there. So I pulled that off, and hopefully that'll be enough to get this rubber boot, what's left of it, off, and the new, hopefully more pliable one on. Okay, I'm happy to report that that did work. It was rubbery enough. It's good, because if you tear it, you know, this is a dealership part. I couldn't get it locally. I couldn't find it on eBay because I didn't know how to look it up. I kept saying like transmission shifter boot, rubber boot on transmission, all kinds of things like that. And all I came up with were the boots that go on the actual gear shift lever. So anyway, I went to the dealership for this, so I'm glad I didn't rip it, because, you know, you pay, it should be like a $2 part, and it's like 14 or something, I don't know. So the old one was pretty bad off, and I just ripped that one off. But it went on okay, and what I did was, what I'm going to do now is put this back on. You got to make sure you don't lose this piece here, because it just comes right off. And it goes in there, a little thusly. And then I got a screw over here, which I'm pretty sure is on camera. If I did that right, it should be on camera. And it's a 14 millimeter. And there are 2 of them. And that one's right here. And it's just that simple. So you may think I didn't clean things up, but in fact I did. It was just so bad, and I was only willing to spend so much time on it. I spent hours doing this, over a few days in fact, getting it as good as it is. That's how bad it was to begin with. Some of these nooks and crannies are just too hard to get, even with a, you know, like a toothbrush or something. So, but anyway, this will be fine. I'm just gonna put it all back together, lube things up, and good to go. So here are the splines, and you can see how it's actually wearing, it basically wore a bit of a groove into the splines, and I'm pretty sure I read those instructions before, and I put some lube on there, but it probably just came off over time. But you can't, because you can't put too much, you don't want it flying around in there, kind of like I had here with the oil leak. Next step seems silly, but it's really crucial, and that is to take your clutch disc, and it goes this way. The flatter portion goes against the flywheel, and the flywheel would be here, right? But in this case, it doesn't matter, because all I'm doing is checking to make sure that the clutch has the right number of splines and goes on there and moves smoothly. So the reason you want to check that is because if there were a different number of splines, it doesn't go on. When you go to put the transmission on, it's going to hit here and you're just going to crush everything, because as you put the bolts on, you're going to be squeezing together, which is also why you don't want to put the bolts on and draw the transmission together until you feel the transmission splines go into that clutch disc when you're putting it in. I spent all day yesterday working on my neighbor's plumbing, so I just now getting back on this. It's had 2 days to simmer now, and I don't see any liquid coming out the back here because it's been facing downward. So I think I'm ready to go ahead and install the new friction surface. I just torqued these down to 5 foot-pounds, and I went from the inside to the outside in a cross pattern. So I went inside from here to here to here to here to here to here to here, and then I did the outside. I just felt like that was a better way to go. I'm not going to bother explaining it, but I always go in a pattern. Fidanza never said anything about tightening them in a pattern that just said to torque them to 5 foot-pounds. So I went in that pattern. You can do what you want, but I always mark each one afterward, and it's a good idea to always make sure you mark don't forget to mark the last one after you've torqued it, because if you ever come back here, you know, years later maybe, or it could be tomorrow, it could be years later, and you want to see if you've torqued one and there's one missing, you're going to assume that you didn't torque that one. It could just be the last one, right? So it's always a good idea to go back and check each one as well. And just to make sure that you didn't mark it and fail to torque it, or torque the same one or something like that. But that's it. That's all there was to it. I'm going to clean this surface. They didn't say anything about that either, but it's a friction surface. I think I'm going to use a little brake cleaner just here, just to make sure I got all the oils from my hand and whatever's on top of this box and so forth off of there, and then I'm ready to reinstall it. So Fidanza gave me an extra bolt and nut. At least I hope they gave me an extra bolt and nut. Anyway, if you're interested, this was an $89 replacement, and I really feel like I didn't need it. I would evaluate what you got on there and make sure you really need to. If you think about it, it's not a surprise that clutches don't wear very much, because most of the time they spend their life together, not sliding, right? So they slide when you shift, and if you're good at it, you slide less when you shift, right? So I pretty much slip it the most in first gear, and then after that I hardly slip at all. I think I'm pretty good about that. But you know, they can warp from heat and use, so it's always good to check it out. The flywheel is now installed, and you don't need to reuse, I mean, you can reuse these bolts, you don't need to buy new ones, unlike the Spider, which had torque to yield bolts, meaning that they would not return to their normal shape afterward. These are normal, they're torqued to 61 foot-pounds in the order I have them written here. Every time I do one, I write it down. It says to do it in several passes. So I did it by hand, and then I went to 40 foot-pounds, which is the lowest my torque wrench would go, probably not super accurate. Then I went to 61, which is what it's supposed to be, and I went in this order, and this is the one that calls out for in the book. And like I said, I put a number on them so I know that I've done them. This is done. I'm going to clean this off now with some brake fluid. I mean, brake cleaner, because I may have gotten this friction surface a little bit oily, and then I'm going to install the clutch. Right now, there are dowels here, there are like 3 of them, I think, and those dowels, you know, align the clutch to the plate. And right now there's a gap here between the pressure plate and the flywheel, so as I'm tightening this guy right here, for instance, nothing's really happening yet because the 2 surfaces haven't met. But you need to make sure that the clutch itself is more or less centered, because at some point the pressure plate will start to trap the clutch. Point is, right now it's just visually aligned on the center line, but because there's no pilot bearing on a lot of these Toyotas, this clutch tool doesn't have anything to go into. So what I do is I look up inside here. You can see where the friction material in the Fidanza flywheel, there's like a line, right? That's where it meets. And I just make sure that the clutch is equal distant to that line all the way around. And so a lot of times I'll turn the engine and I'll just keep looking all around to make sure my clutch is centered. And then once you tighten it a little bit, it'll kind of grab like it has already right now. So even though it's not come down like I said a minute ago, it is enough apparently to grab the clutch and it won't slide around anymore. So what you want to do is try and get the pressure plate to just the point where it's just a little, where you can move the clutch, but it still kind of wants to hold it. And then quickly just tighten the bolts just a tiny bit so that the clutch won't move anymore, and then you're free to tighten them all up. This is really a pain right now because here's what's going on. It's not as working as easily as it was on the Spider. You can't align to this part right here because that's actually part of the pressure plate, so it's already attached and it's going to be symmetrical. It's the distance between here and there, it's underneath, so the clutch is actually obscured a little bit by the pressure plate itself. And you know, you can't just look straight on because it may look perfect to me, but you know, if it's off a little bit, when you go to put the transmission in, it's not, you know, it's not going to be very forgiving. So to me, the most important thing about doing any of this work is listening to music while I'm doing it. Of course, that's going to violate copyright law, so I always turn it off when I film. So what I'm going to do now is go silent. I'll give you some crappy copyright-free music while I tighten these down. It's not going to, the clutch won't move because now it's kind of snug, and as I tighten, it's just going to get tighter. But what I want you to notice is these splines. As I tighten down here, these splines sort of around this area will start to move inward. And as I go around in a different pattern, you'll see the splines all the way around starting to come in. And at the point where these splines are basically flat and not sticking up in a cone shape like they are now is where they should be. They shouldn't be in, and they can be out a little bit, but not too much, according to Exity, who supplied the clutch. So you'll see that happen, but the torque spec on these is 14 foot-pounds, and when I got there on the Spider, it was pretty flush. It looked really pretty good. So I'm just gonna let the camera roll while I tighten those down and just watch these things go inward, and you'll see what I'm talking about. By the way, if you're wondering, yes, you can control your cell phone while wearing blue gloves. Okay, that was a miracle. I mean, an absolute miracle. I lined it up as best I could, and 15 minutes, and I got it to go in. So now I know if I put the bolts on and start drawing it together, it won't damage the clutch, because I could feel the splines go in, and I wrestled for like an hour with the Spider, and the Solara I am so happy now. Okay, so transmission's in. I've got it engine supported on the transmission and on the engine, so it's under a lot of stress, but I think I could handle it. Now I'm sliding the subframe under. That's the next step here, putting it all back together again. Previously I kind of painted part of the subframe, that's why some of it's black and some of it's gray. It's not oil, although there's plenty of that on there too. I cleaned it as thoroughly as I could, but oh well, it's going in. This has helped me immensely. It keeps me organized, it keeps me from losing stuff. It's a little bit of a pain. I use something, I'm still using it, but I get up and I put it back here, and I think, oh, you know, I'm still using it, I shouldn't do that, but it's hard to know when you should and when you shouldn't, right? So, but if I try and do a good job of that, this really helps. So I'm on step 36 here. All I have to do is go over here, and 36. Alright, there are 3 bolts that hold this motor mount in. One there, you can see my finger on it. One is underneath, you can't see. Well, there, you can see there. And then one over there. One threads from underneath. To put it back in, it says that you tighten the silver bolts to 33 and the green bolt to 48. Yeah, only I never dreamed that color would make a difference. I thought, you know, elsewhere, they'll mark them, you know, A, B, C. Why they chose to do green and silver, I don't know if maybe the bolt itself is stronger or something, but I mean, I can't judge color, and I don't know where they... Look at this before you take it out. Alright, I made a little mistake here putting things back together again, and I'm not sure why the order in my procedure was wrong. Maybe I made it taking it apart and forgot, but I put this sway bar link back in, and I put the ball joint back on here when I really need to pull this away to get the drive shaft in. So I'm not sure why I did that before, because that was really hard, that ball joint. I just had to do it on the other side again, and so now I'm gonna have to struggle with it one more time. So don't do that. Make sure that this is very free to move when you put the drive shaft in. Also, another little tip to help you get the drive shaft in is this C-clip here. Oh, glove's ripped. This C-clip here, if you leave it hanging with the open end up, it'll hang further down. It's better if it's rotated that way, then it goes into the slot and not as much sticks out, and it'll be easier to stick it inside the transmission. All right, I got another couple of hints. As soon as you get the shafts in, fill the transmission with oil. That way, if you won't have all the stuff in the way, right? So also, you probably should do it before you put the shaft in this end, because if you need to take the shafts back out, then it'll be easier. Okay, for some reason, that's all the video I shot when I put it back together. Either that or I lost it. I'm not really sure why. But if you need to know how all the little stuff around the outside goes together, you might just watch the video where I took the transmission out. That way, it's pretty much just the reverse. The only thing I did want to mention that probably is a little bit different is the clutch master cylinder. So let me show you that. Okay, so there is the clutch master cylinder, and the slave cylinder is up, it's right down there. And there's an accumulator, which is, pardon me, down in there. And that's kind of a lot of fluid, so you'll find that when you go to bleed it, if you have somebody stepping on the clutch, it takes quite a while, and you'll start to think that it's not working. But if you just keep going, eventually the air will all come out, and you'll start to see fluid flow out. So I just wanted to let you know, if you've ever done that kind of thing before, it'll probably feel like you should be there by now, and you're not. So don't worry about it, just keep going. Now in my case, it took like 3 times as long, because after doing that for about 5, 6, 7 minutes, and I thought, man, I should be seeing it by now. If something definitely is wrong, I found out that my wife was stepping on the brake pedal instead of the clutch. So if you have a wife who's not a car girl, or a car guy or whatever, you might want to explain to them you're draining the clutch and not the brake. Okay, so good luck with yours. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.